Welcome, welcome everyone, and excited to hear from you today, Pete.
Thanks.
Of course. Excited to have everyone here as well for today's
Mhm.
topic, which is data or die. Get your reps ramped at warp speed with Atrium's co-founder and CRO, Pete Kazanji.
Woohoo.
I'm Hannah on the Atrium marketing team, and I will be giving a quick little intro and outro, but this is Pete's show. So we'll give
Uh-oh.
everyone just a couple of minutes to arrive and then get into it. We love to start off with a little icebreaker. So, Pete, any upcoming travel plans?
Mm, Well, I think one of the things I'm excited to do is start visiting more customers upcoming. We're getting to the point where Atrium has so many customers that like I can go to any major city and like put together a dinner and like 10 sales leaders will show up. So I think it's not just like a specific trip. It's kind of more like I'm enjoying the notion of just like having that being woven into my monthly operating rhythm.
Yes, I love that. New customer city every month. It's like the good old days of MSP.
Yeah, love it.
Awesome. Well, before we begin today's session, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest sales leadership community for people in sales leadership, sales management, sales operations, sales enablement, and the related supporting disciplines. MSP's mission is to create an environment for their 27,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. MSP does this through amazing live sessions like what you're about to see today, through their robust online forum and in-person events. For those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. If you don't hesitate to drop our team a note via modernsaleshq.com.
Woohoo.
Awesome. Thanks for the cheering, P. I appreciate it.
I love
So
MSP.
yeah,
The,
I
it's the
mean,
funnest.
yes, totally. So before we get into it and I let Pete run the show, a couple housekeeping notes. Let's talk about Q&A. So if you have a question for Pete, please use the Q&A function and we'll be sure to get to them during the event. And yes, the event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and key takeaways on the previous events page on modernsaleshq.com once we're all finished. Now to our sponsor, which today is Atrium. I'm going to let Pete introduce Atrium and then himself and run the show from here. Go ahead, Pete.
Hannah, is this going to be recorded?
I think it is.
This is going to be recorded. It's always my favorite one. Hey, everyone. My name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. For those that don't know, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. And what that means is it's software that helps AE, SDR, and CS managers use data to improve team performance. And so the way that Atrium does that is by continuously monitoring dozens and dozens of AE and SDR and AMCSM KPIs and proactively alerting managers, leadership, operations, et cetera, when there's something off with their reps, their team, so on. And so what this means is that managers and leadership and ops can get to coaching insights faster about those reps so you can drive positive behavior change and win. And so the best thing about all of this is that it takes only 2 minutes to set up through a read-only connection to your CRM. You can just, in fact, if you want to set up a free Atrium account, you can do that at atriumhq.com. It takes just a couple seconds to, not a couple seconds, a couple minutes to do that there. So that's Atrium. And who am I? I'm Pete. Hello. We're going to be talking about data-driven ramp management today, and I am our ramping coach. As noted earlier, I am the founder and CRO of Atrium, which I already kind of gave you guys a rundown on. And so what I did previous to that was started a first software company in 2010. It's a company called TalentBin. It was a recruiting software company where I kind of got into this whole sales thing, where I was a business generalist founder, and then our first sales rep, first sales manager, first sales leader. Eventually, we were acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014 when the sales org was like around 20 people or so. And then I was responsible for new product sales at Monster for a 1,000-person sales organization. A little bit of a different experience there. Subsequent to that, ended up writing a book on startup sales called Founding Sales. So do a little thinking about sales excellence, modern sales, so on and so forth, sales coaching, etc. So for folks who are joining us, I'm a big fan of giving out resources, and these are some of my favorite resources of late. We're actually giving away copies of these books, and also coffees for closers, Yeti, if you'd like to grab those. 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach is one of my favorite books on applied sales coaching. It's written as a narrative and a parable. It's really kind of fun. It's written by Corey Bray and Hillman Sori. Crushing Quota is by Michelle Vazana. It's a more kind of like research-based book on sales management and kind of the impacts associated therewith. And then The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, of course, is just fantastic. John has wonderful stories to tell from his time as the CRO at Parametric Technology Corporation, Blade Logic, all sorts of other places as well. So if you want to get copies of all these books, and then also a lovely Yeti, go ahead and hit the link that we're going to drop in the chat here. Wonderful. So what we are going to be talking about today is ramping and how to use data to make sure that people, that your reps, whether those are AEs or SDRs, are effectively ramping. Some of the things we're going to be covering is, what a bad ramp versus good ramp looks like. Why does ramping fail? This concept that we talk about, the new ramp productivity offset, how to ramp well in practice, and how to systematize this, plus a little bit of a case study there. And so what we're not going to be talking about is onboarding content and kind of training best practices. What we're going to be talking about is how to use data to monitor, manage, and improve ramping success. And so the first thing we're going to kind of talk about here is, why is measuring ramp effectively so difficult? And I think really what it kind of comes down to is this concept that we talk about, which is the new ramp productivity offset. And it's kind of a mouthful, and but it's a really important thing. And it kind of cuts to the core as to why, when you're onboarding and ramping new reps, it can be hard to understand how they're doing, like how things are going. And so really what it kind of comes down to is, if you look at this, like this right here is a visual conception of what that looks like in practice. And so over here at kind of like the beginning of a rep's time, and then kind of cruises out over here, kind of like a timeline. And so if you think about the stages of a rep's onboarding, it has a number of different kind of like stages. Like first, of course, you've got your training section. Depending on how complicated your product is, like maybe this is a couple weeks, maybe it might be a couple months. And so usually what's happening right there is that reps are not doing selling behavior while they're doing this. So however amount of time that is, let's call it like a month in this case, they're not they're not working on selling behavior. So then what ends up happening is you move into what we call the pipe building period, where they're starting to take first meetings. They're probably messing up a bunch of those first meetings. But importantly, what they're doing is they're progressing, they're kind of building up their pipe. And then now what ends up happening is, like, then you start getting these outputs of success. And so there's a couple different ways that organizations oftentimes measure whether or not somebody's having success. And so you get to this period where you have partial productivity. And it's like the point after which a rep closes their first deal, but before they're at kind of full productivity, where they're closing, I don't know, a deal a week, or 2 deals a month, or whatever it is that is like full productivity for a rep. There's this kind of like in between period here that we call partial productivity. And then there's, of course, the end, right, where a rep gets the full productivity, ideally, or not, and is on their merry way. And so the way that organizations oftentimes measure ramp productivity and whether or not somebody has successfully ramped, unfortunately, oftentimes is too contingent on these lagging indicators here, whether that's saying, hey, you know what, we have an expectation that reps get to full productivity in month 6 or full productivity in month 9 or what have you. Or what they might do is they might certify based on the first deal. Like, okay, the first time somebody closes a deal, we know that they're on their merry way, that we're going to go ahead and certify them at that point, and we don't have to worry about them anymore. And so what we're going to talk about today is why those two approaches are really problematic, and why instead what you need to be doing is coming back into this area over here and making sure that you're doing a good job of monitoring and measuring the ramp of more leading indicators than these, because that's how you're going to know that somebody's ramping effectively. And if they're not, you can intervene to make sure that they are, right, that they do have success. And kind of depending on your sales motion, like this can be really problematic. So in this case, the example here is like, you know, you got a mid-market sales motion, it's got a 60-day sales cycle. And so if you think about your, you know, the time before somebody gets to full productivity, it could be like 2, 3, or 4 deal cycles, right? And so, you know, if you've got say a month of training and then like maybe 3 deal cycles here, that's 180 days. Like you're talking 6 months there. And that's just like for a mid-market sales motion, right? Let alone like an enterprise sales motion. And so that's why it can be really, if you don't pull this forward and pay attention to things that are happening over here, it can be really problematic. So that's what we're going to dig into here today. Let's first talk about this notion of full productivity, right? Full productivity certification here, and why that's kind of problematic. And I'll kind of give some examples of where this can kind of show up here. And so if we go ahead and look at an example here, we've got 3 reps here. In this case, what we have is a visualization of all their ramping behavior, right? So that all their time, this is their time at the company starts at the same time here. You can see that what you have is you've got Elsa and Anna here. Lovely from Frozen. My son appreciates that. And what you can see is that these folks are starting to have success here. Max, on the other hand, is kind of like bumping along, right? But in prototypical, you know, in the prototypical fashion of a problematic ramper, it's not like he's flatlined here, right? He's got a couple deals that are happening here, kind of falls off here, jumps back up again, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a great example of why full productivity instrumentation is really kind of fraught, or full productivity certification is really fraught. It is because, you know, you don't know whether or not to like pull the ripcord here, like, oh, maybe he's just a little bit behind, et cetera. So you can imagine in month 7 here or 8, you know, oh man, maybe it's just around the corner, maybe it's just around the corner, maybe it's just around the corner. And so this is why it's so important to be paying attention to those leading indicators of ramp, because then what you can figure out is like where the issue is coming from. So in this case, what we can see is that very clearly it's actually not an opportunity ownership problem here. Instead, it looks like he's got plenty of opportunities, but then moreover, if you look at the like activity information there, you can see that it's no wonder that Max is struggling with respect to his bookings, because his customer facing meeting volume has never gotten into band with the rest of his peers there. And so this is a great example of, if we were paying attention to this right here, if this is something that had been being bird dogged in this case, you would have seen in month 2, 3, 4 that there probably, it would seem very, very unlikely that he's going to get to the same level of bookings productivity as his peers with this level of selling activity, right? And so this is a great example of why relying only on full productivity based behavioral certification is so problematic. The second thing we're going to talk about here is first deal based cert. And so at very least, this is a more leading indicator, which can be helpful. So rather than saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna wait and see until someone ought to be at full productivity before we, pronounce on them. At least in this case, like we're pulling forward a little bit, right? We're pulling forward a little bit. And so what organizations will do here oftentimes is they'll say, hey, you know what, as soon as somebody closes their first deal, they're off to the races. They're kind of like released to the wild, and we don't have to worry about them anymore. And so the problem with this, of course, is that can be head faked, right? And so kind of give an example here. Here's a similar situation where you've got 3 reps, and here they are at like month equals 3 in their ramp, and Jane comes hot out the gate and she closes a couple deals. But the problem is that subsequent to that, she kind of falls off. And I think, if you've been around long enough in sales management, oftentimes you'll see something like this. Like I actually had a rep at Atrium that had behavior like this. And so in this case, if you declared victory at this point right here and kind of took your eye off the ball, obviously that would subsequently be a substantial problem here for you. And so moreover, if instead, much like we were talking about with Max earlier, if instead we were paying attention to kind of the precursor KPIs to those customer wins, what we would have seen is that sure enough, Jane, she also came hot out of the gate with respect to customer facing meeting volume. She was in band with the others, but really in month 3 and month 4, she never kind of progressed. Right? She never kept progressing. And so it was unsurprising that early on she closed a couple deals like the other reps, but she was never able to like build into full productivity. And if we had looked at this, especially, come month 3, month 4, it gets a little better in month 5, and then like right in here, it would be very, very clear to us that something was going on here that was going to make it pretty unlikely that Jane was going to be in the same level of of performance as the other reps. And then moreover, if we got even fancier and looked at stage advancements for Jane, we could see the same sort of situation there as well, where doing okay in month 2, and then something goes on in month 3 where it starts kind of like trailing off. And so importantly, what we would want to do is we would want to be able to intervene in month 3, in month 4, in order to drive behavior change. Or alternatively, if we can't change behavior, then make the decision to part ways with this rep. But kind of declaring victory here, and then especially can be very, very, this can be a very, very tough management situation where you see a couple deals that happen, and then you get this like recurring kind of temptation, like, oh man, and then she didn't close anything here. It's like, oh, just kidding, back one there. That can be really, really tough when somebody has that initial success. It's almost kind of like you never get a second chance to make a first impression. In this case, the first impression is kind of a head fake there. And so if you're not careful as a manager, you can definitely be head faked. And that's why it's important to be paying attention to these things. And so the way that we advocate to organizations that they ought to be doing this is like, forget this thing over here and forget this over here. We want to be paying attention to the success of a rep's ramp from the point at which they start having customer contact, and be bird dogging their metrics from that point forward. Not output metrics like wins or deals or bookings or whatever, but the input metrics. The input metrics, the intermediaries, etc. And so, and importantly, especially when you have like a mid-market, I mean, even like an SMB sales motion, but like certainly a mid-market and an enterprise sales motion, paying attention to ramp here, if this period right here could be 120 days, 180 days, like fill in the blank, this is like the biggest part of their ramp. So this is a really important time to be paying really, really minute attention to what's going on, there. And so to kind of give you an example of what that looks like in practice, what you can see here is like, this is an ideal situation where all of these 3 reps, like their ramps are very consistent. They're all coming into band with each other. In this case, with respect to customer facing meetings, you can see that they get to up to a certain level and then they start kind of like plateauing, right? When they get to kind of full productivity there. The same thing is happening with respect to opportunity ownership. The same thing is happening with respect to stage advancements. There's no situation like, Jane here or Max here where one of the KPIs is off. Instead, everything is kind of in band there. And then lo and behold, the bookings come. And so this is the sort of thing, like in an ideal world, when you're doing data-driven ramp management here and you're paying attention to these leading indicators, if for whatever reason something falls off, you can intervene to then push that person in the right direction and ensure that you have a successful ramp for everyone. And so this is the ideal future state that organizations should be aspiring to. And there's a variety of ways that you can do this. One way is a bunch of those screenshots up here are examples of what this looks like in Atrium. We have a special ramping view here. You can do it manually. And then moreover, what can be really powerful is if you have specific software that's focused on making sure that these are being monitored appropriately. And so as an example, Atrium does that sort of statistical analysis and monitoring in order to tell the manager, not just, hey, use your eyes to look at this and see if something is off like this, but instead just does the analysis for you. Like, hey, this, this AE right here has interacted with 60% fewer accounts than his peers at the same point in the ramp, or this individual right here has 70% fewer meetings on the calendar as compared to his peers. So like those would be examples of something where you'd want to be notified as a manager that, oh goodness, right, this Jane person has 40% fewer customer facing meetings than her peers at month 3 in ramp, and then we can get ahead of that. And so this is part of what we say to our customers and what we find them being successful with is that great sales management is composed of a set of behaviors that people should be engaged, that managers should be engaged in. One of which, of course, is deal inspection and strategy, deal strategy, not something that managers really have to be reminded about. Tracking progress towards goals, not just from an output standpoint, but also an input standpoint, and especially in ramp, bringing data into one-on-ones. So in this case, when you're having one-on-ones with those reps who are in ramp, making sure that you're bringing data in that in order to have conversations about it and make sure that things are tracking appropriately, and then of course monitoring ramp appropriately. And if there is an issue in ramp, we got to identify that as quickly as possible, and we got to intervene to fix that, right? We're not going to sit around hoping against hope. And then moreover, when you find people who are having great success and coming fast out of the gate, standardizing the success of those folks and then systematizing that for either the rest of the ramping class or alternatively the future classes can be a very powerful thing there. And so this is what our claim to folks is that because these things are so important, they deserve dedicated software in order to help managers with that. And that's exactly what Atrium does. So Atrium has every KPI sales manager, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers could use to manage their reps. It does proactively track progress towards goals and kind of their completion. It has that early warning alerting for all those different metrics for those managers, and then it does diagnosis for diagnosis of root cause issues of reps for managers. And so in short, what we like to say is that Atrium helps sales managers use data to improve team performance, and we do that with hundreds and hundreds of customers. So enough about Atrium. Let's kind of get back to how you can do this in practice. Really, one of the big things there is making sure that you're paying attention to those inputs, right? Making sure that that you're not just looking at outputs, but instead are looking at those inputs as well, as kind of noted previously. And so making sure that it's not just, hey, are our SDRs creating sufficient opportunities in in ramp? Are AEs winning enough? Are they booking enough revenue? But also, are these leading indicators? Are these leading indicators coming into band as well? And also making sure that you're paying attention to these efficiency and quality metrics as well, right? So like, is this AE's win rate in their month 4 at the place where you would expect them to be as compared to their peers, right? At their same point in ramp. Is this SDR's ratio of accounts engaged to opportunities created in band with the other folks at the same sort of point in time? And so the way that you would kind of systematize this is you got to have some sort of like analytic solution or data-driven management solution in place. The kind of like the old school way of doing this is with CRM reporting or business intelligence, both of which are very powerful if you're good at them. The challenge, of course, is that you have to be able to use them. You have to be able to manipulate them, and then in order to create things. And then even if you are able to do that, then you have to like use your eyeballs in order to monitor that. And so, data-driven sales management software like Atrium kind of offers a different approach there. We like to think that it's better in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways. The cool thing about it is it's very quick to set up. It takes a couple of minutes to turn on. It's on its merry way. It's automatically monitored, as you saw previously. So it monitors all those KPIs statistically and lets you know when something is up and kind of like where those issues are. It's a little less flexible than core business intelligence or CRM reporting, but the idea there is that like that's the trade-off that you have in order to have everything ready out of the box and be super easily manipulable by managers and kind of non-technical, non-analytical staff, and also have it monitored for you. And then importantly, once you have that in place, what you want to make sure that you're doing is systematizing, right, the observation of those assets to make sure that you're bird dogging the successful ramp there. And so what that kind of comes down to is a strong operating rhythm. These are kind of some examples of meetings where you can engender that. Pipeline review meeting, deal strategy, one-on-one is of course one of the most powerful places to do this, where you're making sure that this one-on-one meeting, of course, is different than deal strategy or a pipeline review meeting, and instead it's focused on reviewing metrics and tracking progress and coaching initiatives. So like that's the place where you would catch something like this, right? That's the place where you would catch something like this and then intervene as appropriate. And then what you want to be able to do is then get good at reading the data and then acting on it in order to make sure that you can intervene and address issues before they become problems. And so kind of the steps there is detecting a potential issue, diagnosing what the potential root causes might be, and then communicating path to resolution. And so kind of give an example of what that might look like in a ramp scenario. Say you've got a situation like this where you're looking at bookings and you're like, oh man, we're in month 4 here. What's the issue? How can we dig into this? Well, what you want to then do is kind of go upstream from, like, this is an example of our bookings driver tree. In fact, actually, we make these really kind of cool laminates that have these. Maybe we can drop a link in the chat for people to be able to get their own copy if they'd like. But what you do is you kind of go right, where you can see, hey, there's a problem with bookings. Where's that coming from? Is it coming from a problem with wins? Is it coming from a problem with average selling price or deal cycle? Maybe it's coming from insufficient wins, which might be coming from insufficient attempts, which means that maybe it's coming from insufficient total opportunities engaged, or insufficient new opportunities coming into their pipe, or insufficient customer facing meeting volume. And so and so those are the sort of things that you would want to pay attention to in this kind of data-driven ramp period. And so as an example, if we wanted to go right and diagnose what was happening in this case with Max, our friend from earlier, we would be able to see very quickly, like, oh, okay, like say we're at month 4 here. say, oh, what's going on here? Well, like, let's look upstream. Oh man, I see exactly what's going on here. We're at like half as many customer facing meetings as our peers. Great. Now let's intervene and go and seek to fix that. Even better if we were paying attention to that in month 2, month 3, etc. Cool. So now let's talk a little bit about a little case study of this in action, which kind of came up in one of our customers recently. This is anonymized in order to kind of in order to share with you all, but it's really fascinating to kind of see it in practice. And so what you can see here is there is this rep. This is anonymized demo names here, but this little chicken little guy here, who is in purple. And so what you can see is that his ramp with respect to opportunity ownership was actually like not problematic as compared to his peers. In fact, you can see like more recent ramping classes kind of ramping at the same pace there. He's kind of in line with some of the more tenured reps, even better than this person right here. And so if you're only paying attention to that, you might say, oh, well, it's like no problem. And then moreover, as you can see, marketing is doing its job, right? The SDR team is doing its job to fill his pipe. It only starts getting problematic when you start looking at some activity information. So for instance, if you look at how many opportunities are in his pipe and then contrast that with how many ops are actually being touched, you can actually see that he's not doing a very good job of engaging those ops. And then moreover, which is concerning. And then if you look at the how much like prospecting he's doing by looking at the total number of accounts that are being interacted with, you can see that there's a substantial offset here, right, as compared to peers. And then if you look at another indicator of activity, customer facing emails, you can also see that he's just dramatically off as compared to his peers. So something is definitely up here. And then moreover, what's happened, where it's not just the activity that's problematic, it's also showing up in his ability to progress those opportunities. So for instance, this is an Atrium card that allows people to measure how many stages were reached. Because obviously, progressing through different stages in your opportunities is a really important way of understanding how things are moving along. And what you can see here is by looking at how many opportunities got to that disco state, you can see that he's coming into band-ish here, and then really plateaus here in month 3, and then even worse, kind of falls off in month 4. And then obviously disco is an up funnel, an up funnel stage. It gets even worse as you start looking down funnel, like here in solutions presentation there. And so like that also starts trailing off in a very meaningful fashion. And then unsurprisingly, you can see that his bookings are dramatically off as compared to his peers. And so the problem is like, this is a really great example of the importance of paying attention to those leading indicators in this data-driven ramp management period, because his bookings really didn't dramatically diverge until kind of like month 3 here. Like he was okay in month 1 and month 2, and then things get like really bad here in month 3, and then it just terrible in month 4. And so if you only wait until in this case, this organization's sales cycle is a little bit crisper. If you only wait to month 4 or month 5, you would end up in this situation right here. Whereas if you were paying attention to leading indicators in month 2 or month 3 here, or those, again, with respect to activity or with respect to stage advancement, you would see in month 2 and month 3, just not progressing opportunities through disco in any meaningful amount of way as compared to his peers, you would know, right? Like it's in the mail. There's no, it seems extremely unlikely that this person is going to be able to have booking success in month 3 and month 4 and month 5, because just like, look how many opportunities are getting the solutions presentation or the discovery. It's just like highly unlikely. And so what you can see here is that the downside associated with not being as proactive around this as one could be is that you end up with 40% less wins than your peers in the same time period. So, in the first quarter here, you can see that this rep has 40% fewer wins than his peers and about 40% less bookings. And so, this is just a case study of why it's so important to pay attention to those leading indicators in ramp, to make sure that, when you see something like this, right, or you see something like this, you can get ahead of that and you can address, as we like to say, address an issue before it becomes a problem. And if you want to understand kind of where this was coming from, what it came down to was, he actually, so the management based on kind of this information, maybe a little later than could have been, management had a data-driven conversation with the rep, kind of figure out like what was going on. It turned out the rep actually was running a side hustle during business hours, and which is unfortunate. But pretty obvious that was the case here, or something was the case here. Either that, or getting really good at his golf game. And so they ended up terminating him because that's just like not something that you can have within your organization in any meaningful way, and make sure that the rest of your reps who are taking care of business are going to be happy. And so like this just kind of goes to show you the importance of paying attention in this data-driven ramp management period, and why this is the more appropriate modern way of measuring and managing the ramp of newly hired AEs and SDRs. So that's everything we need to cover today. I hope everybody really enjoyed it. As noted earlier, if you'd like to get a copy of some of these fantastic sales coaching and sales management resources, 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach, Crushing Quota, and Qualified Sales Leader, along with Coffees for Closers, Yeti coffee mug, we're going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat here for folks to go ahead and sign up for that. And then if you have reps that are ramping right now and you want to pay attention to how they're doing, Atrium is a phenomenal way of doing that. You can sign up for a free Atrium account. It takes about a couple minutes to sign up. Just go to atriumhq.com. And you can create an Atrium account by signing in with a read-only connection to your Salesforce CRM. So thanks everybody for coming today. Hope you enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete. I think today's session was amazing. It's funny, I feel like a lot of people don't look at ramp like this. So I know after like this session specifically, people come fiending for the slides.
We'll send them out, right?
Yes. And the recording. Don't forget about that.
Is it recorded?
I think I did. I don't know. Just kidding. So thank you everyone for attending today's session. To learn more about Atrium, like Pete said, head over to atriumhq.com. And then just one more time, a reminder that the recording and key takeaways will be available on the MSP website shortly. And don't forget to check out MSP's upcoming events. They've got a whole lot more of Pete's masterclasses along with dozens of other events each month. So have a great day, everyone.